Ladies, what's the hardest life story you've lived through? Story 1. God, I am so angry right now, and I can't even say exactly at what. Just everything feels overwhelming, and it hurts so much that I don't even want to talk to my best friend about it. My husband just told me that he is leaving me, and I can hardly believe the reason. For some background, I am 34, and he is 38. We've been married for almost 2 years and dated for about 2 years before that. So overall, a little more than 4 years together. He has always been very insecure about himself, even though he seemed to have such a great personality, generous, caring, able to express his emotions, all of it. When I got to know him better, I honestly couldn't believe he wasn't already taken. In fact, he had only been in 2 relationships before me, both lasting more than 5 years. He told me it was because he was shy and saw himself as unattractive, saying women never wanted anything from him, especially not the pretty ones. I am considered fairly conventionally attractive, and for years he kept telling me how lucky he felt to have found his dream woman, and that it was unbelievable to him that she also happened to be as attractive as me. At the very beginning, though, I was cautious. I let him court me for quite a while before going out with him for the first time, because I was afraid there was some hidden secret I hadn't uncovered yet, and I also didn't want to come across as too easy. But there was no secret. He really was just a sweet guy, only very shy, and I never thought he was ugly. Not super handsome, maybe not my type at first, but his charm melted all of that away so quickly. Once we started properly dating, everything moved fast, because it all felt so wonderful. But apparently some time ago, he was sitting alone outside at a restaurant having lunch when a woman passed by and struck up a conversation with him. He later showed me a picture of her after I asked, and she is stunning. Maybe I'm exaggerating because of how upset I am, but I have to admit she is more beautiful than me. He didn't tell me much about what they talked about, just that she was friendly. They exchanged numbers, and they began texting more and more. Eventually, he says, she openly started pursuing him, even though she knew he was married, telling him she had fallen for him and couldn't let this opportunity slip away. He told me he felt hesitant once he realized what was happening, but at the same time, he was excited because something like this had never happened to him before. In the past, he would often say that women like me had it easy, that we could just lean back and let men approach us, while for him it was always hard work just to get a single date. I would reply that it's not really like that, and that being attractive comes with its own problems. But he always reminded me how much effort he had to put in just to get me to go out with him. He swears he only met her once more, for lunch after that first encounter, and he insists it wasn't yet an affair. But he told me that he wants to move forward with her because, in his words, this is the first woman who has shown genuine interest in him without him having to work for months just to get one date. He even said, I can't let this pass. The months part referred to the 3 months it took him to get me to agree to a first date, and that is why he says he is breaking up with me. He told me he thinks it's the right thing to do because he wants to keep seeing her, but also feels that if he did that while still with me, it would be emotional cheating, and he doesn't want to cheat. So he ends our marriage before actually starting something with her. I feel devastated. I know there is nothing I can do. I want to be angry at him, but I'm also angry at myself. I really liked him when we first met. So why did I give him such a hard time? If I had been more direct, if I had pursued him instead of making him work so hard, maybe he wouldn't even be interested in this other woman. But I always thought that if a woman makes the first move, she looks easy, and I didn't just want something casual, so I felt I had to act like that. And now it feels like it came back to punish me. Of course, I am angry at him too, but the truth is, he didn't actually cheat on me. He is behaving exactly the way I always said people should act if they fall in love with someone else, by being honest and leaving before betraying. And yet that makes it so much harder for me. In a twisted way, I almost wish he had cheated. That somehow would have been easier to deal with. Story 2. My ex-husband and I were married for 10 years, although the last 2 were spent in different forms of separation, and we've been divorced for about a year now. We share 3 children, ages 10, 8, and 5, and I'm now pregnant with our 4th. I don't even know if we'll actually go through with being parents to 4 kids or not, because I feel so conflicted, and truthfully, we both do. There was no abuse in our marriage and no cheating while we were together, although he did sleep with someone else during the time we were separated. Still, there were many reasons why we ultimately divorced, and after the initial heartbreak, and there was a lot of heartbreak for me, even though I was the one who filed, we actually managed to get along well. Things became surprisingly platonic so quickly, and it seemed that once we removed the romantic side of our relationship, we functioned better. We now split custody of our kids 50-50, which has been difficult for me because being a mom is such a huge part of my identity. Sometimes I struggle to know what to do with myself when it's his week with the kids, but at the same time, I'm grateful that he's such a loving, involved father. I want them to spend time with him, even if I still sometimes cry over not being with them all the time. We even still do things together as a family, sit together at school activities, events, and things like that. He has a girlfriend now, someone he met not long after the divorce was finalized. She seems nice, but it hurt a lot when I found out about her. I cried more than I'd like to admit. He waited about 6 months before introducing her to the kids, and for that I was thankful. And the truth is, they like her. Not long ago, our youngest child was unexpectedly admitted to the hospital for surgery. In the bigger picture, it was a fairly minor procedure, and he's completely fine now. But for me, it was huge. This was my baby, spending multiple nights in a hospital. Through it all, my ex-husband was there by my side. He was supportive, steady, the same strong and calm presence I remembered from the earlier days of our marriage. He told me while we were there that I am still the most important woman in his life, and it brought back all of the reasons why I married him in the first place. When our son was finally discharged, my ex came back to my house. The children were happy to be reunited after staying with his sister, and for a moment, everything felt like a family again. That night, once the kids were asleep, one thing led to another, and we ended up being intimate. It wasn't planned, it wasn't something either of us had expected, but it was passionate, emotional, and overwhelming. We even found ourselves together again later in the night. By the morning, we agreed that our emotions had gotten the best of us, that we didn't regret it, but it would remain just that, an isolated moment, and we would go back to our separate lives without awkwardness. Then a few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. We hadn't used protection, because honestly, I didn't even keep any in the house anymore, and I haven't been on birth control since the divorce. I wasn't dating, I hadn't been interested in it, and I wanted to stay single for a while. Looking back, I realized I was ovulating at the time, which may have subconsciously played a role. My body probably saw him being this great dad and responded in its own way, because every time we've tried to conceive in the past, it worked instantly. Our first child happened even before we officially married. We found out 2 weeks before the wedding. Now here I am, about 8 weeks along. I've known for about a week, and I finally told him this past weekend. Honestly, I debated whether I would even tell him at all. When I did, I think it was more in the hope that he would somehow tell me what to do and make the decision for both of us. But he didn't. And now I sit here, conflicted and unsure. I know it doesn't make sense to have a baby with someone I consciously chose to divorce. I don't need a fourth child, and yet for some reason I can't seem to let go of this. Story 3. I've gone back and forth about sharing this, but I need to let it out somewhere. I'm 23, and just last week I married my high school sweetheart, Josh, who is 26. At first everything felt magical. I was walking into my fairy tale, marrying the love of my life, feeling like a princess. While I was taking photos with my bridesmaids, I noticed Josh's cousin Nicole with a girl I didn't recognize, so I'll call her Sarah. She seemed quiet but polite when we first met. After photos, I went inside to relax before walking down the aisle, and later, once the vows were exchanged, I bumped into Sarah on my way to get food for my mom. She was clearly intoxicated, slurring her words, and began ranting about the venue being too crowded. Then out of nowhere, she said she was surprised Josh married someone like me because she believed he could do better. I tried to brush it off, laughing a little and telling her that I was lucky to have him, but her words stung. I put it aside, had some drinks myself, and tried to focus on enjoying the night. Time passed and I was having fun dancing with Josh and our guests when suddenly I heard a loud crash near the food table. Everyone rushed over, and there was Sarah, sobbing hysterically, while Nicole tried to calm her down. To my shock, she had completely smashed my wedding cake and ripped apart the decorations. My heart sank seeing it destroyed. But when I tried to ask what was wrong, Sarah turned on me, screaming and shouting. Confused and upset, especially after drinking, I yelled back and told Josh to kick her out. To my surprise, he refused, saying she should be allowed to stay because she was a friend. We argued, and I insisted she had ruined my wedding. Eventually, it took both him and Nicole to calm her and convince her to leave, and Nicole ended up taking her home. But when Josh returned, instead of comforting me, he was angry, with me. He ignored me for the rest of the evening, and I could feel how uncomfortable and tense the atmosphere had become for everyone there. The next day, instead of understanding how devastated I was, Josh lectured me, saying I had hurt Sarah's feelings and demanded that I apologize to her. We argued, and he ended up sleeping on the couch. Things cooled slightly in the following days, but whenever I tried to bring it up, he shut me down, telling me I was being overdramatic. The truth is, I had never even met Sarah before my wedding day. I don't know why she would lash out at me like that, and I can't understand why my husband doesn't see how deeply it hurt me. Even though she was drunk, she ruined such an important day for me, and now instead of remembering the joy of my wedding, my mind goes back to that awful incident. Story 4. I'm 28, and I've been in a relationship with my boyfriend, who is 35, for just 4 months. I know it's not a long time, but already I feel like he doesn't really know how to be in a healthy relationship. He was married for 12 years and has 2 kids, and he says that marriage was codependent. Since then, every relationship he's had has been long distance, which might explain some of the challenges. Still, he doesn't give me love in the way I need it, and while I've tried hard to overlook that, he also doesn't treat me like a girlfriend. I'm not the type to want to know where he is every second of the day, but I do need a basic idea so I can plan, like whether we'll see each other that day or if he has his kids. Instead, he acts like he's single, talking about wanting roommates even though he doesn't need the money, and being overly friendly and physical with both men and women. He's not naturally warm or caring, and the way he shows love is mainly by being physically present. We do spend a lot of time together, and I've met everyone important in his life except his ex-wife, which I understand. But he struggles with deep anxiety and constantly raises doubts about whether our relationship has a future, pointing out supposed differences in our interests, even though the only real differences are things like movies and camping, hardly deal breakers. All of this has worn me down mentally, and I don't think I can handle much more. The final straw came when he went out with a woman who was renting a room in his house. They shared a bottle of wine, even though he had told me he didn't feel like going out and wanted to stay home. He insisted nothing happened, and he apologized, but the trust was shaken. Then just yesterday, he went to a play at 9 in the evening, and we agreed we would meet afterward. But after the play ended, he never reached out, and I had to be the one to call him and ask what was going on. Moments like this leave me feeling ignored, dismissed, and questioning why I'm still in this relationship at all. Story 5. My husband, Tom, who is 31, has always had a strained relationship with his father, who is 62. In December, his parents came to visit for Tom's birthday. On the very first day, his dad made a few inappropriate comments about race and sexuality. I ignored them, but Tom pulled him aside twice that day to tell him those remarks weren't appropriate. The following morning, Tom had breakfast with his mom on the balcony, and she asked him if there was anything they shouldn't discuss around me. Tom told her not to make comments about race, about trans people, or about sensitive topics like sexual assault. She agreed, thanked him for letting her know, and that was that, or so I thought. Within just a couple of hours, though, his dad started insisting on telling us jokes from one of his favorite comedians. As soon as he began, Tom's mom kept saying things like, "Maybe not this one," trying to stop him, but he ignored her. The very first joke out of his mouth was, "Did you know 9 out of 10 people don't like," followed by something deeply offensive about assault. The room went silent. Everyone just stared at him. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I got tunnel vision, couldn't breathe, and stepped away into our bedroom to try to calm down. Within minutes, Tom came to check on me and asked if I wanted him to talk to them again. I said no, because I felt like it needed to come from me since Tom had already spoken to his dad about this before, and nothing had changed. So I walked back and said calmly, "I understand you think it's funny, but I don't appreciate those kinds of jokes." Before I could continue, his mom cut me off, stood up, and told me I was making too big of a deal out of it. That's when I snapped and said, "Have you ever been assaulted like that?" She went quiet, said no, and sat back down. I tried again to explain myself, but I was constantly interrupted. And then his father finally looked at me and said, "You just don't understand humor." At that moment, I lost my patience. I told him, "You know what? Forget you," and walked out of the house to clear my head. Later, his mom wanted to talk to both of us without her husband. Tom thought that would help since usually his mom is the reasonable one, but it turned out to be the opposite. She spent the entire conversation belittling me, refusing to apologize for her husband's words, while at the same time admitting they were wrong. She said, "He just enjoys dark humor," to which I replied, "I can understand that, but it shouldn't be hard to avoid making a joke about something so painful, especially when someone present has experienced it." After multiple attempts to make her see my perspective, I finally asked her if someone made a cruel joke about her own sister, about the choices she'd made in her personal life. Would she find it funny or would she feel defensive? She froze, just stared at me, and asked what I meant. I gave a blunt example about how people might judge her sister from the outside and whether she would laugh if someone made a degrading joke about it. The words came out sharper than I intended. I knew it wasn't the right thing to say, and I regret phrasing it that way. But I was exhausted from being dismissed and told I was overreacting without anyone trying to understand me. Even now, I feel guilty about it. My husband doesn't care and actually thinks it was necessary because now his parents won't want to stay with us again. But I can't shake the guilt. I was trying to give her an example she could personally relate to, but it ended up sounding mean and out of line. And I hate that it left me feeling like the bad person when all I wanted was to be heard. Story 6. It's hard to know where to begin. I'm 28, and I spent my entire teenage years in social isolation because of mental illness, agoraphobia, severe depression, dissociation, and anxiety. I never had friends. I was a complete loner. In my early 20s, I finally faced my fears, and it was a long, difficult battle, but I managed it through courage and therapy. Over time, things improved. I became a college graduate with a degree in creative writing, and in 2023, I finally started dating. My courage kept building, and at 27, I lost my virginity. I did it to get it over with, because on that first date, I did everything for the very first time all at once, going from 0 to 100. I developed feelings for the guy, but he broke it off with me over text, saying I was not far along enough within myself for him. After all the inner work I had done just to get to that point, that was what I got in return. He never even bothered to ask about my life or really know me. I lashed out and told him I hoped he enjoyed being alone in the darkness he refused to fix, and he blocked me. A month later, I met my first real boyfriend, and we stayed together for a year and 4 months, even though we only met in person twice because we lived about an hour apart. I believed it was love. I had dreams of intimacy and a future with him, and I gave him the most selfless and healing love I could, but I got next to nothing in return. He was selfish, and after bending myself completely for him, I finally ended it after 482 days of waiting for intimacy that never came. I had asked for only one thing, to experience what it's like to make love. When we first met, he told me he still considered me a virgin because I hadn't experienced that. I tried so many times to bring us closer, even suggested getting an Airbnb since neither of our homes were private, but he refused because of his own comfort. He would rather sit alone in his room than try something new with me. When I finally left him, he told me I was too good for him, and that was why he never slept with me, as if my love for him wasn't clear in everything I did. I later found out he had been secretly looking at trans women online, and when I asked him if he would have gone to the Airbnb if it was one of them asking, he replied with an ashamed emoji, which told me everything. The only times he showed real passion for me were at the beginning or when I was about to fulfill one of his fantasies. Otherwise, I was neglected to death. After our breakup, he even had the audacity to ask me to help him find a trans girlfriend. And during the relationship, he would constantly brag about the intimacy he had with his exes, which turned my stomach. He once sent me a plushie with a handwritten message. It touched me at the time because it was my first gift from a boyfriend, But looking back, it just led me on. Gifts are supposed to add to an already fulfilling relationship, but ours never evolved. After I left, he quickly went on dates with new girls. And while technically he was free to do so, it crushed me to see him put effort into them that he never put into me. It felt like a test to see if he would fight for us, and he didn't. He never planned a date for us, but he was willing to plan for others. He even considered hooking up with a girl at her place, something as unfamiliar to him as an Airbnb, yet suddenly not a problem. While I was with him, and afterward, I also spoke with another guy I met online, someone from across the globe. At first it was beautiful, but then he started acting distant, and I could feel him slipping away. On another platform, I met someone else who called what we had a relationship, but to me it was just a situationship. He too was distant, self-focused, a dry texter, and not emotionally giving enough. And of course, he was far away. No matter what I tried, I always ended up alone in my room, tortured by isolation, longing for a kind of love I may never find. One date still haunts me. The man looked shocked at how petite I am and seemed to friend-zone me the moment I got in his car. He disrespected me, made comments about my body, and mocked me, which brought back painful memories of childhood bullying. It was devastating. Imagine being rejected not only by strangers, but by the one person who is supposed to love you. My own boyfriend didn't even want me. All I've ever asked for is true love, a mutually healing, deeply understanding sacred bond built on admiration and exclusivity, uniting emotional, intellectual, and physical passion. That's what I long for. But when I tried to express this, my ex told me that life is not a Disney movie. It cut deep, and I told him it wasn't a Disney movie because of him. If he had been a true partner, I believe we could have created that kind of beauty, fleeting or not. He underestimated my spirit and my ability to turn life into something pure and meaningful. I constantly ask myself why society doesn't know how to love, why people don't seem interested in truly getting to know one another, why so many only chase meaningless encounters, why my ex only lit up when talking about fantasies, never for me, why he suggested our intimacy would one day grow stale if he truly loved me, why he wanted to bring others into what was supposed to be our bond, why I was never enough. Over time, I've concluded that I'm unlovable. I was born with pituitary dwarfism, bullied as a child, and abandoned even by my only friend. Men only talk to me when they want my online content, and they never stay afterward. Valentine's Day has always been a dream of mine, yet it's only brought disappointment. My first Valentine's with my ex was ignored, even though he knew it mattered to me. He gave me no card until I asked for it. This past Valentine's, I wrote heartfelt letters to the two men I was speaking with. One just said thank you and called me amazing, nothing more. The other, the man across the globe, responded sweetly, but then stopped speaking to me altogether. Meanwhile, I've had to watch my sister live my dream. I've watched her boyfriend give her roses, cards, thoughtful gifts, bring her to meet his family and light up her spirit in a way that makes me feel hollow inside. My favorite quote is, "We accept the love we think we deserve from the perks of being a wallflower." I hold on to that, realizing it's better to be alone than with someone who makes you feel alone. I also cling to the song, "True Love Will Find You in the End," which always makes me cry. I've poured out empathy, curiosity, and selflessness with an open heart, extending all the love I have to give, but no one has taken it yet. Story 7. I'm 21, and for most of my life, I would have said I was a relatively happy kid, at least up until my late teenage years. Things really started changing after 2022, when I lost my adopted grandmother. I couldn't leave the house, and every time my parents went out, I stayed home crying, locked in grief for a week straight until it eased. Not long after, I lost my dog, and that pain resurfaced. She was 16, so I knew it was her time, but I still regret not showing her enough love in my teens, just taking care of her without really appreciating her presence. Then my real grandmother passed away, and that loss was crushing. I remember walking around the block again and again, hoping it wasn't real, hoping it was just a bad dream, but it wasn't. Soon we had to sort through her belongings, divide them between family members, and eventually sell her house. I had hoped someone in the family would step up to keep it, but no one did. I was only 19 and didn't have a steady job, so I couldn't do it myself. The house was sold to local farmers and then torn down. Not long after, I got a new dog, a Doberman, who is now a year old. He's full of energy, and those first weeks were hard. I had what people call the puppy blues. I'd sit with him in my lap and cry because of the huge life change. And when he got sick during his first 2 weeks, even though it wasn't serious, I was in such a bad mental space that I had thoughts I regret, wondering what it would mean if something bad happened, whether I would feel crushed or strangely relieved. I hated thinking like that, but my head wasn't in the right place. Things only escalated this past summer. On July 1st, I went to the gym, had a good workout, but afterward at home, I spiraled into overthinking, wondering why I was even doing it. I've always been skinny, and I thought that getting stronger would mean changing who I was, so I stopped going entirely. Then, on July 28th, I was hit with an overwhelming feeling unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I found myself stuck in the past, thinking about how simple life had once been. I felt like the past 3 years had slipped away without me doing anything meaningful. It was as though time had blurred together, and now suddenly it was the present. That realization made me feel like I'd forgotten who I am. I hadn't gone to college, hadn't made any major changes in life, and maybe part of this emptiness came from losing my childhood home. My family's trailer, the place I lived in from birth until 2019, was demolished 2 years ago. Back then, I didn't think much of it, but now the memory tears me apart. That house wasn't perfect, but to me it was beautiful. The hole in the wall my dad left from a pull-up bar, the furnace blowing up right next to me while I somehow slept through it, the uneven floors, the little quirks that made it ours. It was full of character, full of memories. Since it's gone, I feel like I've lost part of myself. We now live in a modular home on the same property, but it doesn't feel the same. I feel like I haven't created any lasting memories here, like the ones that shaped me before. I can still vividly picture the walls and the posts in the old living room, the layout, the feel of the house, but at the same time, I feel like my identity has slipped away with it. Recently, I've had thoughts of not wanting my dog anymore and just wanting to go back to simpler times. But that only makes me feel more guilty because I know I should appreciate the present. Since my birthday on the 30th, I've had this strange, heavy feeling in my chest. It got worse day by day, 2 hours of crying on Tuesday, then 3 or 4 on Wednesday, then 6 hours yesterday, just breaking down over wanting what I can't have anymore. I keep thinking about the future in ways that crush me. In 10 years, I'll have to face losing my grandparents. In 30 years, I'll have to face losing my parents. People tell me to live for myself, but I've never cared about leaving behind a legacy. I want life and the people I love right in front of me. I had such a good childhood, full of character and warmth, and now I feel completely lost. All the goals I had just a couple of weeks ago are gone, and it feels like this emptiness and grief are going to overpower me soon. Story 8. I'm 27 and have been with my boyfriend, Danny, who is 35 for almost a year, but he almost never talks about his ex-wife, Myrrh, who is 29. The only thing I knew about her was that they share a 5-year-old son, Ian, who stays with Danny on weekends. Recently, Ian graduated from daycare, and Myrrh invited Danny for a celebratory dinner at her house because their son requested it. Danny asked me to come too. I hesitated, but he insisted. On Saturday we went, and I expected Myrrh to be cold toward me, but instead she welcomed us warmly. She was polite, casual, and even introduced me to Ian. Her house was spotless, fragrant, and genuinely felt like a home. While Danny and Ian played, I offered to help Myrrh prepare dinner, but she smiled and said she could manage, encouraging me to go bond with them. At dinner, the atmosphere between Myrrh and Danny was surprisingly natural, not overly friendly, but not bitter either, just comfortable. She never said anything that would make me feel awkward, instead asking me simple, polite questions, as if it were just any first meeting. I couldn't help but notice how Danny looked at her, though, with a mix of sadness and lingering love, a look I realized he has never given me. Ian was sweet, polite, giggly, and well-behaved, and I could see how both parents answered his every little question, no matter how silly, with patience and affection. When we were leaving, Myrrh even packed me some food after I mentioned that I live alone and often end up eating takeout, and that small act touched me deeply. On the way home, I couldn't keep it in anymore and asked Danny how things ended between them when it was so obvious that he once had a beautiful family. He pulled the car over and I braced for him to kick me out, but instead he finally told me the truth. While Mare was away in another country, grieving the loss of her mother, Danny cheated on her with a mutual friend who secretly filmed them and sent the video to Mare. When Mare returned home, she didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't even argue. She simply told Danny to serve the divorce papers, said she would sign them as long as she had sole custody and he had visitation rights, and then she slept in Ian's room. He told me he had tried to stop her from walking away, but she shut him out completely. The night before he left, he heard her crying, and though he wanted to comfort her, he was too ashamed and afraid of making it worse. Danny admitted he has hated himself ever since for cheating during her most vulnerable moment, when he should have been her support. He described Mare as the kind of woman who was always there for everyone: friends, family, his parents, his nephews, cooking, baking, babysitting, caring, and never once complaining. He told me she was patient, selfless, and everything anyone could hope for. As he confessed, Danny, this big man who had always held himself together, broke down sobbing. He told me he liked me and wasn't using me to move on, and I believed him. This revelation didn't make me feel like I was being used, but it did change me. I could see his pain and his love for the family he lost, and in that moment I realized I might just be in the way. Mare is still single, choosing to focus on raising Ian and pursuing her law degree, and I can't shake the feeling that Danny's heart never really left her. Story 9. I'm 24 and recently broke up with my ex, who is 27, and I want to recognize how much support I found online through strangers who reminded me of my worth. We dated for 3.5 years, having met in college, and from the very beginning, I believed he was everything I had ever dreamed of. I felt loved, comfortable, and trusted him completely. Most of our relationship was long distance, first because of COVID and later for other reasons. But we made it work with daily texting and video calls, and we planned visits at least once a month, spending every possible second together when we could. For a long time, I believed in him, but about 2.5 years into the relationship, I had a nightmare that he was cheating. It seemed silly to me at first. I knew dreams could be random, but no matter how I tried to rationalize it, my anxiety lingered. I confronted him, and he swore on his late father's name, who had cheated on his mother, that he would never betray me. For a while I felt reassured, but deep down my instincts kept whispering that something was wrong. I ignored small red flags until it became unbearable, and finally I reached a breaking point. On the day I decided to act, I snooped through his iPad, something I am not proud of, but I felt desperate for the truth. What I found shattered me: countless screenshots of his exes, female friends, even some of his students, along with their posts, stories, selfies, and flirty conversations. He had shared many of these with his best friend, joked about missed opportunities, complimented multiple women, and maintained inappropriate conversations behind my back. The worst discovery was his closeness with one girl in particular, someone he called every night, someone he recorded himself playing the piano for on her birthday, something he never once did for me, even when I told him it would mean a lot. The dates on these files stretched from before our relationship started until well into our time together, and I realized this was simply who he was. I felt disgusted and brokenhearted, but I also knew what I needed to do. I sat him down, with tears in my eyes but without breaking eye contact, and I tore apart a letter he had just given me and a bracelet I had once gifted him. I told him he was exactly the kind of man I had always feared meeting, that I wished I had never met him, that I regretted every moment together, and that while he promised me eternal love, he was secretly collecting pictures of other women and playing the piano for them. Then I told him I was packing my things and that he needed to leave. He didn't say a single word, just left. Afterward, I destroyed everything in his room that held meaning for us. Once I left his house, I blocked him everywhere, on social media, email, and phone, and deleted every picture of him. I reached out to my friends, called, and texted them, leaning on them for support. 2 days later, I even sent an audio message to his younger sister, who was 21, explaining what I had discovered because I didn't want him to control the story. To my relief, she replied that she never realized her brother was that kind of person, and she told me she was on my side. That was enough to give me closure. The first days afterward were hell, but now, nearly a month later, I feel so much better. I still think about him, and sometimes I even miss him, but I've never regretted my decision. The hardest part has been accepting that he never truly loved me, even though he acted like he did, because every good memory is stained by the betrayal happening behind the scenes. And yet, despite the pain, I've started moving forward. I got my driver's license. I joined pole dance lessons. I'm looking for a good therapist, and I've leaned into my family, my friends, and my hobbies. There is joy and love in me, and no one will ever take that away again. No matter how deeply I once loved him, I love myself more, and I'm proud to say I walked away and never looked back. Storytime. I'm a 27-year-old woman serving in the Army, and ironically, the hardest part of my service has never been the physical demands, but rather the relentless mental and emotional toll of proving myself every single day. I constantly have to defend my qualifications, and I live with the anxiety of being humiliated or underestimated simply because of my gender. Normally, I try to meet these challenges with strength. I joke with the guys, I call out cis comments, I challenge their assumptions, and I do it tactfully and articulately rather than with anger. I've always wanted to set a good example of what a female soldier can be, because I know that if I stumble, people won't see it as one person's weakness, they'll see it as a reflection on all women. But this daily pressure is exhausting, and lately it has gotten even worse with all the news about the new Army physical test, the ACFT. The old test was scaled by gender so women could professionally compete fairly with men in their careers, while combat specialties still had their own higher standards. That system made sense, but the ACFT proposes gender-neutral standards, meaning women, regardless of their job, will be disadvantaged in career progression compared to male peers, even if the men are poor at their actual duties but just happen to run faster. Learning how the test was studied and manipulated, to the point where even Congress got involved, felt like a betrayal. To me, it was as if the Army was quietly trying to push women out, and it shattered my belief that the institution I joined with such patriotism actually wanted me there. I know what women bring to the table. I've seen female soldiers outplan, outthink, and even save missions where supposedly strong men failed. But under this new system, those same women will be left behind. What broke me most was when my own boyfriend, who is also in the Army and someone I've known for years, shared an article about the ACFT and casually said he believes the scores should be gender neutral. I was shocked, completely speechless, because he had never once given me the impression of holding a cis opinion, and when I asked him to clarify, not only did he confirm it, but he immediately tried to shut the conversation down, telling me to agree to disagree because he didn't want to get into it. That to me was such a display of privilege, because for him, being a man means he can opt out of the debate, while for me, being a woman means I live in that debate every single day of my career. I told him I wanted to talk about it further, to at least make sure I understood his reasoning, but he brushed me off, saying he wasn't going to change his mind and neither was I, so there was no point. He ended the call, and though he offered to text me later, I said no. What that showed me is that this belief is deeply ingrained in him, like politics or religion, and I don't know if I can live with a man who at his core believes it's fair to exploit a woman's weakness for the benefit of men. I honestly don't know if he's the man I thought he was anymore. It left me heartbroken, alone, and defeated, because I can fight when I know I have people in my corner, but now even that feels like it's slipping away. The voices supporting women in the military are drowned out, whispers among the constant chorus of dismissive comments online, in articles, and even in casual conversations at work. It's overwhelming, and it makes me so sad, so tired, and so unsure of how much longer I can keep carrying this weight alone. Story 11. The summer between 4th and 5th grade, I got my first period. That same summer, my hips developed and my body changed rapidly. I became more aware of how different I looked compared to my classmates and friends, and they noticed too. They would talk about getting their clothes from Limited Too and other kids' stores, while I had to shop in the teen and even women's section. They compared their weights, usually around 70 pounds. When I mentioned that I was almost 100, they snickered at each other. I quickly became an outcast and was bullied for my body type. When I told my mom, her suggestion was dieting. So, while other little girls ate Frosted Flakes for breakfast, I had a Slim Fast Shake. For lunch, while my classmates had tacos and pizza, I had ants on a log. For dinner, while my friends ate casseroles, I had a lean cuisine. I cried myself to sleep, both hungry and frustrated that nothing was working. Why wouldn't my hips get smaller? Why couldn't I fit into the clothes I wanted to? Why couldn't I look as skinny and pretty as the girls on TV? Why did I instead resemble the ones society labeled as fat and unattractive? And why, at such a young age, did this feel like the only thing that mattered? As I grew into a teenager, things didn't change. Tumblr became the blueprint of what it meant to be young and beautiful. It was there I first discovered unhealthy eating behaviors. Throughout high school, I struggled with them and spent time in inpatient facilities where professionals tried to help me. But nothing seemed to change. I felt like I was fading away, trapped in a cycle I couldn't escape. My long-term boyfriend even mocked me, calling me thunder thighs while I walked in size 0 jeans, and I believed him. Now at 25, I'm still trying to come to terms with my body and my weight, but I often hear the younger version of myself whispering that I should be ashamed of how I look. Learning not to count every calorie, not to cry after eating a small fry, not to run to the bathroom after a cupcake, just living my life, is still one of the hardest battles I face. Story 12. I've never really had what most people would call a normal cycle, and even saying that out loud still makes me feel embarrassed at 32 years old. My very first period at age 12 lasted nearly 4 months, and from then on, it became the same exhausting pattern. 2 to 4 months of heavy bleeding, then maybe a short break before it all started again. What made it unbearable wasn't just the length, but the sheer severity. Pads and tampons, no matter the type or how many I layered, were useless. And by middle school, I had no choice but to wear adult diapers. Sometimes the bleeding was so intense it poured out like water, and other times I was passing clots the size of my palm. The pain was more than just pelvic cramps. It was full-body agony that made it hard to move, combined with nausea so bad I struggled to keep food down and dropped weight constantly. I fainted more times than I can count, often hitting my head on the way down, which led to multiple ER visits where the doctors never ran any tests. They only treated my anemia and told me to see an OB/GYN, which I couldn't do back then because of my home situation. When I finally went at 18, the doctor brushed me off with, "You're still young. This'll get better after you've had a kid or two," which wasn't helpful at all considering I've never wanted children. So I just resigned myself to living with it, year after year, even as it got worse. Eventually, when the symptoms became so debilitating I nearly had to quit my job, I turned to Nurx and started birth control. For the past 5 years, it hasn't solved everything, but it's been life-changing. Now my periods last about 10 days, spotting is more common than not, and the pain is closer to what most would consider normal. I could finally use regular tampons and function somewhat normally, which felt like a miracle. But in the past 2 years, I developed a blood clot and migraine-like episodes, and my hematologist is pushing me to stop birth control, convinced it's to blame. I tried to explain that without it, I can't function, but he didn't really believe me. Now I'm searching for a new OB, though the thought of having to retell my story only to be dismissed again makes me dread it. At this point, I feel like the only real solution is a hysterectomy, but finding a doctor willing to perform one on a woman without children feels nearly impossible. I'm so tired of fighting this battle and just wish someone would take me seriously. Story 13. I'm 19, and both of my parents have been abusive. My dad has been out of my life with no contact for almost 6 years, and I left my mom on February 1st after a huge fight because I just couldn't stay home anymore. I couch surfed for 2 weeks, found a place, moved in, got a second job after my mom took away my college fund, and I've been pushing through, but it's so hard. Deep down, I want my mom so badly, yet I know that longing isn't healthy. She only reaches out when she needs something from me, and never with any warmth or kindness. My new job is awful too. The chef bullies me constantly, to the point of borderline harassment. It's not Sewell, but he singles me out in cruel ways. And other employees always check on me at the end of shifts because I'm the only girl there. And since I'm gay, it's not even about attraction. He just targets me. I finally spoke to the owner, and he confronted the chef, but now I'm terrified to go back to work. On top of that, I've been working 40 to 50 hours a week for the past month, plus school and an 8-hour volunteer shift each week. In total, I'm pushing nearly 60 hours and I'm beyond exhausted. I barely get 5 hours of sleep a night. After my shifts end around midnight, I still have to eat, shower, and study before sleeping at 2. Then I'm up by 7 because my roommate's cat meows nonstop. My only chances to sleep in are Thursdays and Saturdays, but otherwise I'm up early for classes or work. I do have another job lined up for summer, planning to leave one of my current ones, but not the one with the bad chef since they give me the most hours. The summer schedule is already set, working from 8 to 4 at one job and then 4:10 to 11 or 12 at another, 5 to 6 days a week. The only good part is that after rent, I'll have enough saved for 2 years of school and then only need to work about 30 hours a week in the fall. I know I have a plan, but I'm already breaking down from exhaustion. To make it worse, my health isn't great. I'm underweight and can't gain because I start vomiting if I eat too much due to stomach issues. My doctor visit is soon, but in the meantime, the chef even mocked me, telling me to wear baggy pants because no one wants to see that when I wore leggings. I feel so small and humiliated working with him. More than anything, I just feel like someone lost and hurting, longing only for comfort and reassurance, hoping everything will be all right. But it doesn't come. My birthday is less than a week away, and I'd be amazed if I even received a simple message. It breaks my heart, especially since sides have already been taken. I shared something deeply painful, something I had carried for years in silence, and instead of understanding, I was told I was being unfair and inconsiderate. But I wasn't. I asked her when she had therapy next, how busy school was, when she worked. I tried to be as gentle as possible with something so painful. Now my sister has turned on me too, saying she isn't upset that I told her, just that I was inconsiderate about how I did it. Between losing them both, working nonstop, battling harassment at my job, struggling with my health, and pushing through school, I feel completely alone. Story 14. I'm 30 years old and just 6 months into marriage, I told my husband that I was extremely unhappy, that I no longer loved him, and that I didn't want to stay. We've been together for almost 5 years, and own a house, share a dog, but no kids. After the wedding, I noticed his respect for me fading, his tone, his attitude. I tried to talk to him about it, but nothing meaningful came of those conversations. Then only 2 months after getting married, I decided to buy a reusable vape. He absolutely flipped out, shouting, yelling, following me from room to room. He's entitled to his opinion about my decision, but not to speak to me like that. Afterward, he gave me 3 days of silence until I went to my mom's. I was embarrassed and furious at how he thought that behavior was okay. Eventually, he offered a weak apology, and I reluctantly accepted, trying to chalk it up to stress or work pressure. But a few months later, he did something that completely broke me. We were out with his parents celebrating his stepdad's birthday. The whole evening, he was tense, making cutting remarks about how much wine his mom was drinking. I shot him looks like, "That's your mom, stop it." On the way home, his mom struggled to get into the taxi because of a hip replacement. Instead of helping, my husband jumped out, snapped, "I'll just walk then," and slammed the door, leaving us behind. His mom started crying, and I went into damage control mode, consoling her during the ride. When we got home, he refused to come back for me until his stepdad pressured him. That night, he ranted about how no one ever listened to him. I finally called him out on his behavior, saying he embarrassed himself and disrespected his parents. Then, in a fit of anger, he pulled off his wedding ring, threw it at me, and shouted, "I'll put that back on when you can speak to me with respect." In that moment, something inside me broke. I calmly placed his ring and mine on the bedside table and went back to my phone. Minutes later, he returned, apologized weakly, and put his ring back on. He asked why I'd removed mine, and I told him the only way I'd consider wearing it again was if he left me alone for the rest of the night. The next morning, we had a 3-hour conversation. I gave him an ultimatum: therapy or we were done. He cried, threatened suicide, and I felt shattered. This was a man who had thrown his wedding ring at me like it meant nothing. He eventually agreed to therapy, though it was group sessions, not the one-on-one counseling I knew he needed. He stayed careful not to step out of line after that, but my anger toward him grew. We weren't even sharing a bed anymore. He blamed snoring and shift work, but I felt rejected, craving affection, intimacy, even simple comfort. I missed being held, missed feeling wanted, but instead I was buried under the weight of life's responsibilities, holding everything together alone. I reached my breaking point. I didn't love him anymore. I didn't care if he touched me. I didn't want him to. One Friday after work, I told him the truth, and now I'm back at my mom's. My dad is terminally ill with cancer, and while it's been heartbreaking, being home with family is also a relief. Looking back, my husband did so many things I shouldn't have tolerated, like reading my journal twice and showing controlling tendencies I ignored. I know I wasn't perfect either. I should have been more open, but I didn't feel safe to share my feelings. The truth is, I should never have married him. I don't feel strong or empowered. I just feel like a woman who made a mistake. I'll probably be that divorcee at the back of weddings, sipping wine, telling myself love is a lie, while quietly carrying the scars of everything I've endured. Story 15. I, 30F, married my husband, 32M, in July 2024 after dating for only 8 months. When we first met, we discovered we had gone to the same school in my home country for 10 years, though we had never known each other back then. That nostalgia connected us, and our vibes seemed to align perfectly. His background appeared so similar to mine. Educated family, progressive views on women, politics, and religion. I fell in love deeply, and he was equally into me. I was honest about my struggles with depression and the progress I had made. He admitted to having anger issues, though he promised he was working on them. Before marriage, we had 2 or 3 big verbal fights, and looking back, I should have taken them as a warning. But I believed him when he said I was his soulmate, the most perfect woman for him. He loved my empathy, compassion, and conduct, and I admired his confidence, discipline, and ambition. I truly admired him. Within 2 weeks of marriage, everything changed. I had quit smoking cigarettes and vaping since meeting him because he hated it, but I sometimes slipped, especially under stress. At my parents' house during my last visit before leaving the country, I took one drag from my brother's cigarette. That night, my husband started verbally abusing me, flipping me off and demanding a divorce because he didn't want a smoker as his wife. I was shocked, confused, guilty, and hurt. After we returned, he became easily angered and gave me the silent treatment over the smallest things. He had only half moved into my place, so I helped him pack and move the rest of his belongings, juggling work and also helping his sister relocate to another city. I stayed loyal and continued caring for him. Just 2 days after the final move, we were supposed to celebrate a religious festival together. A minor argument blew up because of him. He refused to let me participate in the rituals, despite my efforts to respect his beliefs. He then unleashed cruel words, attacking my personality, my character, and even my intimacy. That night, he emotionally tormented me for hours and nearly became physically violent. I broke down and told my family everything, and they supported me when I said I wanted a divorce. But when he begged for another chance, I gave in. He twisted the narrative, shifted all blame onto me, and even called me the emotionally abusive one. He criticized my family for the wedding they had arranged and started pulling away from them after they called out his behavior. I finally had enough. I filed for divorce, and now I'm waiting to finalize the decree. He broke every promise, discarded his supposed progressive beliefs, and constantly lied about me to his mother-in-law to paint me as the problem. Even though she had once promised to support me, he manipulated me into signing a prenup by making me prove I wasn't after his money. During the divorce process, his true colors shone: his anger, his pettiness, his narcissism. I hadn't even understood what real narcissism was until this marriage. Now I feel deeply betrayed, heartbroken, and lost. I don't know if I will ever trust anyone again. As I prepare to sign the final decree, I just needed to release all of this from my chest. Story 16. I am a 30-year-old woman, and I've been with my husband, who is 33, for a little over 8 years, married for 6. We share 2 daughters together. Last weekend, my husband and I went to a bar with some of my friends, and we ran into his ex, who used to be a friend of a friend. For some context, back when they dated, my husband was overwhelmed with a full-time corporate job, part-time school, and training competitively for a sport. His ex gave him an ultimatum: spend more time with her or break up. He chose to break up. Later, she tried to apologize and asked for another chance, but he refused. Just 2 months later, I met him at a party, and that's where our story began. His ex has always hated me and insists that she and my husband are meant to be. At the bar, she made a scene, and though we tried to avoid her, she eventually blurted out that they would still be together if he had taken her seriously back then. I lost my patience and told her that at that time, he only had about 10 to 15 free hours a week, which he always gave to her, and she never appreciated it. When I met him, I supported him through that busy phase. We made the most of the time we had, and now, years later, he has more balance in life, and we've built a beautiful marriage and family together. She got angry and snapped that I should watch out because one day his father's qualities would show up, then stormed off. In all the years we've been together, my husband has barely spoken about his father. The only things he's ever told me are that his dad died 2 years before we met and that he was extremely abusive. That night, I had a little too much to drink, and what his ex said stuck with me. I kept thinking about his father and why she, after only 6 months with him, knew more about that part of his life than I did after years of marriage. When we got home, I asked my husband about it. He told me we'd talk the next day when I was sober. But the next morning, I couldn't let it go. While he was at the gym, I crossed a terrible boundary and read his journal. What I found was far worse than I could have ever imagined. Painful, detailed entries about his father's abuse. That evening, when we finally spoke, I admitted what I had done. I told him I read his diary, apologized, and assured him that he is infinitely better than the man his father was. He barely reacted, but in the days after, he grew distant. He started leaving early, coming home late, only making time to play with our daughters before bed. On the second day of this cold silence, I apologized again and begged him to talk. I tried to cuddle up to him on the couch, but when he barely responded, I got upset and started an argument. In my frustration, I made the cruelest mistake of all. I yelled that he was acting just like his father. The second I said it, I knew I had crossed a line I could never take back. I tried to apologize, but he cut me off and told me to stop. That was the last real conversation we had. It's been 4 days now. He still keeps up appearances for our daughters, but between us, there's only silence. I know I hurt him deeply, maybe in a way that can't be undone. I feel ashamed of what I said, ashamed of reading his private thoughts, and bitterly regretful that I let my resentment over his ex knowing things about him push me into violating his trust. I'm terrified that I've destroyed not just his trust, but our marriage too. Story 17. I was 30 when I got engaged to E, the man I had been dating for 3 years. Everything felt perfect until I introduced him to my family. They welcomed him warmly, and before the trip ended, my brother suggested a siblings and partners cabin trip to Bonn. I agreed, and at first it was fun. But on the last day, my sister and her husband had yet another fight. He stormed off and she stayed behind crying. My fiancé suggested we siblings go on a hike while he stayed back, saying he'd catch up on emails. She eventually returned alone to the cabin while we kept hiking. Later, I went back and found her car still there. Inside, I heard moans upstairs, and then my fiancé's voice. I went up and caught him with my sister. I froze, snapped a photo, left my ring on the counter, grabbed my things, and walked out. I sent the picture to the family chat before turning off my phone. By the next morning, I had dozens of missed calls and texts. Her husband had seen the picture too, and things got ugly for my fiancé. At first, I felt justified, but now I regret sending that photo to everyone. They didn't deserve to be dragged into it. The engagement is over. I left the family chat, and I haven't spoken to anyone since. Months later, I still feel empty and don't know how to move on.